This is a map of Alaska showing its neighbors, Russia to the left over the Bering Strait and bordered by Canada to the right. This is a map of the state of Alaska itself, showing the location of Ketchikan in relationship to the rest of the state. As you can see, Ketchikan is the most southeastern city in Alaska. Ketchikan is named after Ketchikan Creek, which flows through the town. Ketchikan comes from the Tlingit Indian name for the creek, the meaning of which is unclear. It may mean the river belonging to Ketch, or others claim it means thundering wings of an eagle. Ketchikan is located on Revillagigedo Island. A half a mile wide channel called the Tongass Narrows separates it from the Gravina Island, where the Ketchikan International Airport is located. It is here that in August of 2005, the Alaskan government had planned to build a bridge at a cost of $223 million. The bridge would have connected Ketchikan and Gravina Island so that one could drive to the airport rather than take the ferry across the water. After years of national and international ridicule over the expense of this project, which was nicknamed the Bridge to Nowhere by its critics, the Alaskan government chose not to build the bridge and spend the appropriated funds elsewhere. Ketchikan, like its neighboring cities Juneau and Sitka, is accessible only by sea or air. According to the 2010 United States Census Bureau, the city has a total area of 5.9 square miles with a population of 8,050 people. The racial makeup of the city is 61% whites, 17% Native Americans, 11% Asians, mostly Filipinos who worked in the canneries, with the rest being blacks or African Americans, Pacific Islanders, Hispanics, or some other races. The history of Ketchikan can be easily summed up in the history of 4 industries: mining, fishing, timber, and tourism. By the 1890s, the local mining industry began to take shape. Even before the famed Klondike Gold Rush of 1898, prospectors were already probing the hills around Ketchikan for gold, silver, and other minerals. When more than 100,000 gold seekers flooded Alaska and the Yukon, a sizable number ended up in the Ketchikan area. Ketchikan continued to grow in the first decade of the 20th century. Few gold and silver deposits were found, but large copper deposits on nearby Prince of Wales Island spurred the local economy. The fishing industry also began to expand in this period. The first full-size cannery in Ketchikan was built by the Fildago Island Packing Company south of the creek in 1900. In 1909, local businessman J.R. Hackman invented the first floating fish trap, a remarkably efficient device that allowed Ketchikan to become the salmon canning capital of the world. Unfortunately, injudicious use of the traps would later nearly wipe out the region's salmon runs. Low mineral prices eventually stalled the mining industry, but in the 1920s, the fishing industry took over as the area's largest economy. At its peak in the late 1920s and the early 1930s, more than a dozen canneries operated along the Tongass Narrows. Ketchikan at this time was known as the salmon capital of the world. In addition to the salmon fleet, Ketchikan boasted of having one of the world's largest halibut fleet in those days, and hundreds of fishing boats packed the harbor during the fishing season. At this time, Ketchikan, with more than 5,000 residents, was the largest city in the state. Creek Street is built over the water because it was simply too difficult to blast away the rocky hills surrounding the creek. This is a common theme with Ketchikans, as you will notice a large percentage of the town is quite literally built over the water. During this time also, Ketchikan got more than a bit of notoriety out of its open nature. Because of its close location to the Canadian border, whiskey running was easy during Prohibition. Since Creek Street is built over the water, bootleggers will simply wait until high tide and row the rowboats right up the stream to deliver the goods in the dark. Most of the houses had hidden trapdoors underneath the house just to receive delivery. In Ketchikan's Creek Street red light district were the infamous Browdy houses up and down the coast. In the mid-1920s, there were over 30 brothels on Creek Street alone, the most well-known which was Dolly's house. Unlike some of the other brothels which had various working girls to choose from, Dolly worked alone in her own house. She considered herself a sporting woman, not a prostitute. Her clients were well-respected businessmen and government officials with whom she built a friendly relationship with. Dolly's house was later, upon her request, turned into a museum as it is today. Ketchikan was the only place in the world where, it was said, both men and fish went up the creek to spawn. In fact, Creek Street was once the home of Ketchikan's #1 industry, prostitution. Married Man's Trail is a staircase and wooden boardwalk extension of Creek Street where men would use to discreetly visit the working houses along Creek Street instead of being caught walking in the front doors. Over the next 2 decades, many of the canneries closed as consumer tastes changed and the salmon runs began to decrease, primarily because the traps, often placed right in front of the fish stream, were allowing too few fish to escape to spawn. Ketchikan's location within the 17 million acre Tongass forest had always interested the national timber industry, and several attempts were made to take advantage of the billions of board feet of timber in the surrounding forests. In the 1940s, the federal government began a concerted effort to open up the national forests to large-scale pulp and paper development. The pulp operations also spread to neighboring communities as logging operations moved throughout the national forest. Ketchikan became a supply center for all those communities in southern Southeast Alaska. However, by the mid-1970s, the timber industry began to wane. Ketchikan pulp mill was becoming outdated and would need major upgrades to meet newer, tougher environmental laws. The mill continued to operate in Ketchikan until 1997, but the industry gradually began to shrink in influence. At the same time, the visitor industry began to grow in importance in the local economy. Up until the early 1970s, most visitors came on small coastal cruise ships a couple of times per week. But that changed when larger ships holding over 1,000 passengers began arriving in Southeast Alaska. Initially, visits were rare, but by the 1980s, other cruise lines began to arrive, and soon there were usually 2 large ships in port each day. By the 1990s, about 100,000 visitors a year began coming to Ketchikan. By the turn of the 21st century, the number was 800,000, and once again, the economy had shifted. Tourist season in Alaska is from May through September, with June, July, and August being the peak times. There are several cruise ship companies that serve Alaska. The usual cruise, with round trips from either Vancouver, BC, or Seattle, Washington, lasts for 7 to 12 days. The ports of calls are Skagway, Juneau, Sitka, and Ketchikan, with scenic cruises to Tracy Arm, College Fjord, Glacier Bay National Park, and the Inside Passage. Many businesses in Ketchikan's downtown area shifted north to Ketchikan's west end and were replaced by seasonal, tourist-related businesses downtown. The economy had shifted towards a seasonal rather than year-round economy, but Ketchikan is still maintaining its status as the original shopping and service hub of southern Southeast Alaska. Wildlife sightings are also an everyday encounter in this fascinating part. Over 100 species of migrating birds, including bald eagles, plus black bears, Sitka black-tailed deer, mountain goats, mink, sea otters, seal, humpback whales, and an abundance of salmon can be found in the Ketchikan area. The Misty Fjord National Mountains is also one of the area's major attractions. Totem poles, while the meaning of the designs are as varied as the cultures which produce them, all are pictography, or writing in pictures. Totem poles may recount familiar legends, clan lineages, or notable events. Some poles are erected to celebrate cultural beliefs, while others are intended mostly as artistic presentations. Ketchikan has the world's largest collection of standing totem poles, which are found throughout the city and at 4 major locations, one of which is the Totem Bite State Historic Park. It is located on the north end of town and is home to 14 Native American totem poles, in addition to a clan house, a short walk through the rainforest. Also interesting in Ketchikan is the fish ladder at Creek Street, a structure on a barrier to facilitate the fish's natural migration. It enables the fish to pass around the barrier by swimming and leaping up a series of relatively low steps into the waters on the other side. The velocity of water falling over the steps has to be great enough to attract the fish to the ladder, but it cannot be so great that it washes the fish back downstream or exhausts it to a point of inability to continue the journey upriver. Today, the economy of Ketchikan is based on fishing and tourism. And this city is such a beautiful place to visit. Picturesque, colorful, clean, and quaint, with resemblances of still being a pioneer town. There are no skyscrapers here as with its neighboring cities, and is surrounded only by mountains and sea. Hanging above the salmon stream are the pilings supporting the historic structures that once housed the red light district and helped the bootleggers move the whiskey unseen at high tide. Today, the historic district along the famed Creek Street holds souvenir shops, bookstores, and restaurants. There are also a number of museums in town to tell its history from a pioneer, native, and modern perspective, and a proud sense of its cultural and sometimes notorious past. If you want to visit an interesting and unique place, Ketchikan is just such that city.